Today we're discussing a case study of a technology entrepreneur wanting to move to the UAE with his family. I'm joined by two guests, Marie O'Neill from EER and also Laurence Black from Asiaciti in Dubai. Marie, before we get into the scenario, it'd be great to hear a little bit more about your background and the EER business.
Thank you, David. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Marie O'Neill, originally from Ireland, living in Dubai. I'm the co-owner of EER. We offer services across the Middle East, corporate services, immigration and relocation. So for individuals and high net worths wanting to move to the Middle East and the UAE, we can provide structuring and residency needs for them. And we also work with a lot of corporates where we help their employees with immigration and relocation needs into the Middle East.
Fantastic. And Laurence, it'd be great to hear a bit more about yourself and the Asiaciti business out of Dubai.
So, David, thank you. And Asiaciti Trust is an international trust and corporate service provider. For over 40 years, we've delivered specialist fiduciary and administrative services to individuals, intermediaries, and corporations. We have operations in Singapore, Hong Kong, the Cook Islands, Nevis, New Zealand, Samoa, and of course our rep office here in Dubai. Importantly, we remain family-owned and fully independent, and this resonates particularly well with high net worth families and allows us to remain very client-centric. Myself, as many know, I've been based here in the Middle East for over 29 years now. Originally coming from the Channel Islands, very familiar with offshore and cross-border planning, and have been assisting many families over this time in navigating their way through complex, ever increasing complex scenarios.
So just to get into the scenario, we have Frank Stevens, who is a British technology entrepreneur, 45 years old, married to Heidi, who's a Canadian national. They have two children, aged 15 and 11. Frank is relocating to Dubai to set up a new office for his company based on growth in Middle East clients. From a personal perspective, he needs advice on immigration, finding a property and schools for children. From a business perspective, he is looking for office space and to hire 5 to 8 staff and some of the corporate governance support for this new entity. Frank has pre-existing wealth, including a £2 million holiday home in France, a £5 million home in London, which the family intend to retain for use when in the UK, £10 million portfolio of global equities managed by an international bank in Singapore, and £5 million carried interest from previous venture owned via Cayman Islands vehicle. Frank will accumulate substantial wealth while resident in Dubai over the next 10 years if all goes well. He wanted to provide for his children to undertake university study in the US or Europe and buy their first home. He wants advice on wealth planning and how he should structure and invest newly created wealth while UAE resident. So Marie, a lot to unpack there. But Before we get into some of the detail, I mean, the entrepreneurial sort of spirit in Dubai is something that's very front and center, isn't it? So are you seeing at the moment a lot of people coming to Dubai and setting up businesses?
Yes, definitely. And, there very much is an entrepreneurial spirit in Dubai. The economy is booming at the moment. The tech industry as well is booming. So we're seeing a lot of people coming to the UAE at the moment, and particularly Dubai, bringing their business, wanting to move for lifestyle purposes, but also wanting to bring their businesses and set up new businesses in the UAE and Dubai. So for Frank, we can definitely help him to set up an entity in Dubai. So there are various free zones, mainland now, where he can have own his company 100%, which is relatively new. Previously, you needed to have a local sponsor. So we would sit down with Frank, look at his exact requirements, the exact activity, what he's looking for in the short term and the long term. Is he going to hire staff? Location? Is he cost conscious, budget conscious? And we would recommend then different free zones and options for him to set up his entity. And that would then lead to his residency. So basically the best option for Frank would be set up an entity and then get a shareholder or employment visa under that entity. So he'll have a 2-year renewable visa under his entity.
So just looking at a little bit more detail, I mean, on the immigration issues, what are some of the visa considerations that Frank would have and his family as well?
Yeah, so there are several visa options in the UAE, but for Frank and his scenario then, There would be two options really which would be the best suited. So Frank could set up an entity and then very simply get a shareholder or an employee visa under his entity once it's established. The other option for Frank would be a golden visa. So this is a relatively new visa category that was announced and launched in 2018. There are various different options, but in Frank's scenario for the golden visa, I would recommend one or two options. He purchased a property to the value of 2 million dirhams or above, so that's one option.
Which, given that they're going to have their main residence in the UAE, that's highly likely to have a qualifying property.
Exactly, and with his portfolio and background, most likely he would want to buy a property and have it as his residence in the UAE. And 2 million dirhams in the current property market in the UAE is not overly high, so that's definitely an option for him. Or he could simply put 2 million dirhams in a fixed deposit account in a UAE bank for 2 years, but he'll still have his visa for 10 years. So the golden visa is a 10-year visa. So it's very convenient for people because they have that security of 10 years. He would then sponsor his dependents, so his wife and children would go under his visa. He'd self-sponsor him under that visa, and they would also get a 10-year visa then under the golden visa category.
So it really depends on the rest of the story as to how they go, what kind of property they're going to buy, and also what work he intends to do when he's in Dubai, acting as an entrepreneur and a business owner, or more in a style of an investor.
Exactly, and it'll depend whether he wants to actively do business in the UAE or keep his business outside of the UAE, which option he would go for.
And how would you assist then with that visa application process?
Yeah, so basically we would assign an immigration specialist to him. They would take care of everything A to Z. So the most important thing would be, once we start talking to him, is look at his documents, because he will need to have his education certificate, marriage certificate, and his children's birth certificates attested and legalized in the home countries. So this can take some time. We can assist with that, but it can take 6 to 8 weeks depending on the country they originated from. So they will need to go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, UAE Embassy in the home country, and then the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the UAE.
So here Frank's wife Heidi is a Canadian, so she would go and vouch some documents, perhaps if she's on a Canadian passport.
Yes, so it would basically, it would need to be the marriage certificate. So depending on where they got married, that marriage certificate would need to be attested in the country where they were married. So this is the beginning basically of the process, and when we sit down and meet with the client first and talk about immigration, that's the first step that we would talk about because it takes the longest. Then we would outline the whole process, timelines, documents required, etc. The immigration specialist will gather everything and basically take care of everything step by step, update Frank along the way. And usually visas, on average, will take anything from 2 to 6 weeks to be processed. So it's a relatively short process as countries go.
Okay, and at what time scale should Frank be thinking about making this application? So if they're not permanently moved as yet, at what point do people come to you? Is it like a year out, they look at it? Is it actually closer? As you say, it doesn't take a long time necessarily to process.
Yes.
What sort of time scale do people look at it?
I wouldn't say a year out. Okay, conversations may happen then, but when it comes to the immigration, really 1 to 2 months out is plenty of time. But if he's going down the route of setting up an entity, that could take 1 to 2 months. Then his visa, 4 to 6 weeks. So you're looking at really 2 to 3 months. Ideally a conversation, maybe 4 months before he really wants to move to the UAE.
Yes, well, and also obviously there's a lot of other considerations. Finding a property takes time and all of the other things which we'll just come along to. But I mean, just looking at the property side, I mean, Frank is 45, he's got a teenage family. What are the sort of kind of properties that he might look at?
Yes, so first off, since Frank has a family and schooling requirements are involved, we would definitely say find the school before you find the property.
Yeah.
Look
what's proximate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because Dubai is quite spread out. There are lots of communities, there are lots of schools. So ideally, he would want to find his property near to the school where his children are going to be registered. For two main reasons. Traffic can be quite bad in Dubai, and as well, it's quite an early school start. Most schools start at 7:45 a.m. So we would work on the schooling and then work on the property in the area where they choose the school. So it's a little bit more complex when there's schooling and housing involved, because you're trying to find that ideal community, but you're also trying to find it near to the school as well. So we work in parallel, but the schooling is definitely an important element when it comes to the housing then as well.
And the main styles of property might be between, say, an apartment, a villa.
Exactly, yeah. So apartment, villa, in a community, not in a community, if they choose a villa, then, their lifestyle requirements, what are their hobbies? They've got teenage children. Do they like the sea? Do they like the desert more? So it depends as well which area they want to live in. But there are definitely several options available to Frank and his young or teenage family.
And I imagine there's communities around schools, as you say, because a lot of people are coming in looking for the school solution, suitable property nearby, so they're likely to find that all coming together anyway.
And it's kind of, when you look at families, there's nests of areas. So you'll have a few schools together and then you'll have a few communities around that. So it's very much they're situated together.
I suppose if he couldn't find anything that he liked, buying land is an option, isn't it? And developing something, and increasingly with people making more permanent moves, they're looking at these kind of different options.
And we're looking at that with a lot of high net worths moving from Europe. They're looking at buying plots of land and building their own properties. This is something relatively new that didn't happen in the past, but we're seeing more of it now.
And in the schools for the teenage children, the curriculums they study are sort of like international, like what if they've been living in the UK and on the sort of UK type syllabus.
Yes.
What do you find? What are locally some of the options?
Yeah, so there are various curriculums and they're all available in the UAE. So the most common ones would be the British curriculum or the IB curriculum. And even we're finding families relocate from Britain, some of them are actually in IB curriculums because there are a lot of international schools in the UK now following the IB program. So we will go through the various curriculums with them, then look at the areas and look at the availabilities in the schools, talk them through it, and then arrange school tours for them, because it's very important. There are plenty of schools in Dubai, okay? There are waiting lists with some outstanding schools, good, very good. What's important for a family is that they actually step into the school. They do a school tour, they get a feel for the school. So, there is only so much we can do with them. We can explain what the school is like, but, I've seen it myself with looking at school for my daughter. It's very much that feel of a school when you walk in. So we will arrange the school tours. Our relocation consultant will then go with them on the school tours and then step them through the whole process when they choose a school and want to register with that school. And we would recommend as well, David, that they register with at least 2 or 3 schools, because there are waiting lists with a lot of the schools. They may not get into their number one choice. So at least then they have a second and third option.
Be prepared, yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
And Frank is intending to be active in business to ideally make a lot of money over the coming year. So his corporate activity and demands are going to be paramount as well in this move. Looking at the fact that Frank is, is a technology consultant, he's part of a nimble business. What are some of the things that you could support him on as he wants to try and grow the franchise that they're starting to build in the Middle East with clients? What are some of the things you might assist with?
So if he sets up an entity, we can definitely assist with setting up the entity. But then on an ongoing basis, we can provide a corporate secretarial package. So we will take care of all his annual filings, ESR, auditing filings, the renewal of his trade license and establishment card, help him with his board meetings, provide a board secretary to draft the agenda, do the minutes, etc. Any regulatory changes, we'll inform him and assist him on what needs to be done. So it's basically hand-holding of setting up the entity and then everything involved with the entity moving forward. If he's hiring staff, take care of all those visas. When it comes to hiring staff, we can recommend him to some recruitment agencies. When he wants to find an office, if it's a serviced office, we can take him to the serviced offices, help him go through that whole process. Or if it's commercial office space he wants to rent, and fit it out himself, then we'll introduce him to real estate agents in the commercial space that can help him with that.
Are there places that technology-focused businesses tend to head to? I know in Dubai they can carve up the map a little bit into these different zones, but what do you find there with a business like this? Might he want to think about?
So there's Dubai Internet City, which is very much tech focused. If he's in the financial tech space, he may look at DIFC, which is a financial center. But if he's focusing on more consultancy from a tech perspective, he can actually be located in any of the free zones or the majority of them. And there are consultancy activities available. But if he wants to be, very much around that tech industry and that buzz and energy, then Dubai Internet City would definitely be the best place for him.
Okay, and DIFC is somewhere that a lot of professionals have been, or people particularly looking at the finance sector. What would be taking space in DIFC? Is that possible? What are some of the
Yes.
challenges with doing that?
It's definitely possible, but it is one of the more expensive free zones, for obvious reasons. It's got a very good brand, but, a lot of clients do still want to be there. There is available office space, but yeah, it's one of the more expensive options definitely for Frank.
What are some of the challenges around getting banking for an entity? I mean, it's difficult many parts of the world.
Yes.
And how can you help someone like Frank with the banking requirements on a commercial entity?
So setting up the entity is relatively straightforward and the easy part really. The challenge is getting a corporate bank account. Not impossible, but it's certainly challenging and for some clients and can take anything up to 2 to 3 months. So basically what is important is that the activity that Frank is setting his license under, that he has a background in that activity. So everything aligns, his business plan, his CV aligns with the business that he's setting up in the UAE and the activity of that business. Also what's important is that, which Frank is doing, that he's actually a resident of the UAE and that he lives in the UAE. So this all brings substance to his company and opening the corporate bank account, and that he also has an office space. So all of this helps, and obviously having all the documentation available, several months of bank statements, and once that's all presented to the bankers, the chances are much higher. But with the UAE being on the grey list, compliance is quite high, which it should be. So definitely a lot of documentation is required, and it may take some time to open the corporate bank account.
Thanks, Marie. And Laurence, just to bring you in, I mean, Frank has a lot of international assets already. How could you assist him creating a wealth planning strategy while he's resident in the UAE?
Yeah, well, David, I believe client discovery is key here. Full disclosure is important to the advisors in order for them to provide robust and advice and avoid any traps in any planning. Too often, I think we see individuals planning for part of their assets and not considering all and what might occur in the future. So once we have all the details through proper client and thorough client discovery, expert tax advice is likely to be required for cross-border planning. In this scenario in particular, possibly a trust for their international assets. A foundation could be considered for the UAE assets, but they must be careful to avoid any UK inheritance charge with Frank's domicile there. And it's important that tax advice should be taken before settling any assets into any structure. It is, however, likely that the UAE wills might be more appropriate and cost-effective for UAE assets. They plan, the family here plan to keep their property in the UK for their own use, they say, and they will need to take, to watch out for the number of days they're spending in the UK, not to fall foul of any UK statutory residency tests. And this is likely to allow them to have a limited number of days in the UK in any given year, likely to be 90 days per annum. That said, it would appear that Frank remains UK domicile, and we therefore have a situation with mixed domicile with his wife's Canadian status. And there is therefore an opportunity to consider some classic non-dom IHT planning. And Frank's wife may therefore wish to settle an offshore trust to take advantage of this. Asset protection and estate planning would also be benefits of such a trust. Their children's education and expenses could be met efficiently as beneficiaries of a trust settled by their mother. And it's also worth noting Frank's carried interest from a previous venture. He's holding that in a Cayman structure, but quite simply, he really should consider realizing this gain whilst he's in the UAE to avoid any tax charge. And again, getting this blessed by appropriate tax advisors.
And thanks for that. And what are the typical structuring options for owning international assets while UAE resident?
Yeah, good question, David. Well, whilst UAE foundations are now our option, offshore trusts still remain a robust and proven solution for international assets. We see many cross-border scenarios where offshore trusts are used for wealth protection and estates and tax planning, such as scenarios we see regularly are clients with US connectivity using foreign grantor trusts. And Canadian connectivity seems to be a resurgence. Obviously, with my background, having been with Royal Bank of Canada for many years, we're familiar with this type of planning, but we're finding this very common again. The use of trusts and foundations offshore work very well for this.
And how would you suggest he protects the wealth created in future?
Yeah, for Frank, the use of offshore trusts, or Frank and his wife, the use of offshore trusts for wealth protection is, as I say, a well-trodden path for expatriates and high net worth individuals. Choice of jurisdiction, careful drafting of the trust document are going to be key in this regard. And once again, clients' discovery, obtaining professional advice, qualified advice is most important.
And if Frank were to pass away, what impact would local succession laws have on how his assets are devolved?
Well, as mentioned, it's likely that UAE wills would be most appropriate and cost effective. As non-Muslims, Frank and his wife could include their international assets in the UAE will, but it's often preferred to have these solutions separated, one for UAE and another for international assets. The local laws now allow for in the UAE allow for non-Muslims to include their international assets, but there is this French property which will need to be considered also, and a separate French will would probably prove effective for this, and it's unlikely to be included in any trust for tax reasons. And of course, any assets that are placed in the suitable trust would avoid any local probate whatsoever.
And finally, Laurence, how do you find the right partners to make this a success?
Yeah, well, as Maria's mentioned, there are many factors to bear in mind when moving to the UAE, and obtaining qualified professional advice from experienced advisors is critical and important. We see all too often people move into the UAE, they spend a lot of time and effort settling their families into their new lives, focusing on their business activities, and sometimes little time is spent on wealth planning and protection of the future. They may have been familiar with and comfortable with circumstances in their previous jurisdiction, but they'll need help navigating their way through a complex situation in an international environment. There is, however, a good ecosystem of qualified and professional advisors locally, and people like Frank would need to ensure that they're seeking advice from the right regulated and qualified individuals and firms. Remembering to check their credentials and get good references from experienced people like Marie and other seasoned practitioners within the professional community who can aid them in navigating their way through the system and ensure that their needs and objectives are truly met and understood.
So, Marie, if Frank wants to put these plans into action, what would be the first step that you would take with him to get this in train?
Yeah. Well, David, we would definitely have a call with him, or if he was in the UAE, have a meeting with him, go through his exact requirements, outline all the options with him, and then fine-tune to exactly what he wants, and then outline the whole process and how it's going to work with him.
Well, thank you, Marie, and thank you, Laurence. If you've enjoyed this case study, please do reach out to Marie or Laurence for more specific information.